Guys, so I want to start off the last chapter, last video I made was based on a story about a kid that was suicidal because this girl had committed suicide. And I want to talk to you guys now. We're moving on to really some cool things that had happened in our ministry in the first couple of years. What it was is basically go down to San Clemente Pier every Friday night, had a group of people that started kind of congregating. We'd have anywhere from 20 to 60 people down there, and always had people. We played music, did everything. Was really super cool, but one of the things that would happen amongst thousands of things, but one of the things that happened one of the nights was this girl. A couple of drug dealers had taken a 14-year-old girl under the pier, and they were getting her high, getting her done up on heroin or whatever they were doing with her that particular day. And she was pretty wasted. And I went under there, I saw him go under there, and something told me go get her. So I left my group of guys. We had been there for a couple hours already. It was pretty late. And I went underneath and I grabbed this girl, and she was wasted. These guys were trying to have their way with her, and I just walked up and said, "Hey man, not tonight, not happening." And of course they started to threaten me a little bit, and I reminded them who I was and why I was there and where I came from, and they backed off. And I took her and we just kind of sat her up. Well, she had known one of the guys that was in my group at the time, and he knew her family. So he got on the phone and he called her brother. And, I was sitting there and I prayed with her and I talked to her a little bit and just trying to figure out why a 14-year-old girl, she was super pretty, but, at that time her face was all done up with acne, and she was doing drugs and she was smoking, and there was just a lot of stuff going on in her life. And we started talking, and she told me how her father had cheated on her mother, and they had split up, and nobody talked to her about it, and she was living with the family, and she just kind of turned her life upside down. And apparently these guys were involved pretty heavily in the churches around the area. And as we started talking, I started to pray for somebody, and it was a pretty heavy situation. And this particular lady I had been talking to for weeks had been coming down, and she had just left her house, left a letter sitting on her dresser, left her 14-month daughter with her mom, just asked her to babysit her, and she was walking down to the pier, and I just happened to catch her out of the corner of my eye walking out on the pier. And I called out to her, and she kind of ignored me and kept walking. So I went after her and I started talking to her, and come to find out she was there to kill herself. She was going to commit suicide that night. She had saved herself for her husband, so she was a virgin when she got married. All through high school, super pretty lady, and all through high school, I guess, she had avoided guys and just kind of, she dated a little bit but never crossed that line. And she wasn't a Christian, but she just wanted to do that. And she got to college, and her family was super wealthy, and she got into college, and she started really liking this guy, and he was a pretty popular guy at her college. I don't know which one it was, but one of the big Ivy League colleges that she was at. And she's a super educated lady and very successful. And she was telling me how her kid, this guy told her he loved her, told her he wanted to marry her, didn't put himself on her, didn't really force anything, and just all through college they hung out together. And then what ended up happening was, right out of college, right after she graduated, she got her degrees and everything, started a company. They were what seemed to be pretty happy. They had grown a little bit distant, but they got married. And she gets pregnant right off the bat, she's got this baby, 14-month-old baby. And a couple days before, she had found out that this guy hustled her all through college, and he knew her story. He knew her story from high school. He had heard about her family being super wealthy. So him and his girlfriend actually hustled her into marrying him so that he could take all of her money. And she had no idea that he had a girlfriend. You know, he played the part really well and everything, but it was a big hustle. And he had come to her and she had found out about this girl, and he came to her and said, listen, I want a divorce. I'm leaving you. So now she's been hustled. She's given up her virginity. She's got a child now, and put her career on hold because of it. And he's just been living this high life off of her money. And he basically ran her bank accounts down to nothing, going places with his girlfriend while she was finishing up her degree, because he only did his 4 years and got out. She did 8. And, you know, she had no idea what was going on. And it was a whole scam. And she had found out, and she was just done. She goes, I wrote my daughter a really good letter telling her I love her, and I'm sorry, but I can't go on this way. And so here I am, I'm talking to this lady, and just listening to her heart. She's crying. This little girl, this 14-year-old's just sitting on the wall watching me with this lady. And we started praying, and I was like, well, can I pray for you? And just got a couple of my friends to come over and pray with her and stuff. And we sat her down and we started praying. And sometimes when I pray, what I'll do is I'll just kind of, I'm not one of those guys that prays in tongues really out loud and stuff, like, you know, busted out super loud, screaming, yelling kind of thing. But a lot of times what I'll do is just under my breath, I'll walk around praying in the Spirit. And I was doing that for this lady because I felt like it was necessary at the time, because I had no idea what to pray for, because her story was so horrible. And what ended up happening was this little girl, this teenage girl, sorry if she wasn't a little girl, she was a teenage girl, but thought she was a woman at the time, she did. But she heard me praying in tongues, and she gets off the wall, and you gotta remember, she's stoned, she's kind of out of it, and she stands up and she walks over to me and she goes, hey, that language you're speaking. And I go, what are you talking about? She goes, that language that you're praying in, I know that language. And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm saying, it's tongues, you don't really understand it. And you just do it out of faith. And I go, well, what do you mean? And she goes, I know that language. My grandfather prays over me in that language every night since I was a kid. And I go, well, your grandpa's a smart man, must be a good person. And at the time, a lot of people, I haven't really talked about this yet in the video, but just because I wasn't sure how to address it, but we're on it, so I'll get on it. But basically what ended up happening was, when I got saved, the church that was affiliated, the pastor that was affiliated with the church, was a very popular Southern California church at the time, very popular all over the place since the 70s and 80s. And it was one of the biggest churches around Southern California for sure. A lot of churches during the Jesus movement came from this particular church. And the teacher, and it was, she's like, I told her, I said, well, I don't know who your grandpa is, but he's a very smart guy. And she goes, well, my grandfather is Chuck Smith. And I'm like, I got saved through a Calvary Chapel, and I knew Chuck. I owed Chuck my life. And I go, excuse me? And she goes, my grandfather is Chuck Smith, and he's passed away since. And she was telling me how he would pray over her in tongues, and he would put his hands, lay hands on her and pray for her, and he would pray for her while she was sleeping, and sometimes she'd hear him and wake up, but she'd keep her eyes closed, so he'd finish his prayer. And she's telling me this, and I'm thinking to myself, man, how cool is it, not that she was hooked on drugs or having problems in her life, But this was probably, I'd say probably 10 years after I became a Christian. But her grandfather is the reason that I got saved. And because of his faith and because of his teaching, I was there that night to be the one that helped her get her life together. And it really impacted me. My daughter was laying on a blanket on the concrete that night. She was probably 3 years old at the time. And she was laying there with me because she wanted to be at the ministry with me doing what we do. And funny thing is she's a worship leader now, but she was raised around worship. She was raised around musicians. And so here this girl, she's telling me this story, and I'm like, well, I didn't know who her grandfather was. And when she told me that, my heart just dropped, and I was just like, Lord, what the heck? Like, I'm here because of this guy, and now I'm helping his family, you know, when he's gone. And one of the realities for me, and I respect that family so much and the impact they've had on the community in Southern California and the world. I mean, there's pastors all over the world because of them. I live in Texas, and I actually met a couple that go to a Calvary Chapel out here. And I attended a Calvary Chapel in Hawaii when I lived there. And the pastor that ran that church has recently passed away, but awesome guy, awesome teacher. They're just good churches, they're good people, and they're grounded people, and they're accountable people that run a lot of the Calvaries. But, you know, at the same time, it proved to me and it showed to me at that point in my life, here's this little girl, her grandfather's one of the most powerful ministers in the world at the time, at least in my world, and his granddaughter's a drug addict at 14. And what God showed me is no matter how powerful of a ministry we have, our family has to come first. We cannot let our kids get wrapped up and taken down by the enemy while we're saving the world. And it was an honor because Chuck actually called me and thanked me later for helping her. And I had never talked to him before. I didn't know that he knew my ministry. And he told me, he said, I've heard about you, man, and you're doing good things out there. And when I actually moved to Hawaii several years later, felt called to the islands, he told me, he said, you know, Joe, I would never send another pastor to the islands again. And I said, well, why is that? You know, here I am getting ready to leave. And he goes, the islands are so spiritually heavy. It's a melting pot of spiritual, you know, battles and darkness and just different things. He said, I've sent some of the strongest pastors I've ever known over there and watched them just get eaten alive and spit out, and they've left the church, they've left their faith because of it. And wasn't very inspirational, but it gave me a heads up on what God was getting ready to do with me. But you know, one of the things that was so neat was once I helped her, and her brother actually came and picked her up that night, and they took her, and she got into rehab. I hadn't seen her in months, and I'm standing there one day, and I'm praying for somebody, and when I open my eyes, I look up, and there's this young girl, real pretty, long brown hair, and you know, had her hair up in a bandana, kind of looked like Alice in Wonderland, you know, little dress and the whole bit. And I looked up and I knew it was her. And I saw her through my little crowd of people that I was always around down there. And I walked over to her and she said, I don't know if you remember me or not. And I said, of course, how are you? And how have you been? You look amazing. You know, you look healthy. And when I had seen her, she was wearing little booty shorts the first time. She had acne all over her. She was wearing a little cutoff shirt because it was summertime in Southern California. And she wasn't healthy, and this time she was wearing a dress, just real pretty young lady. And I go, how you been? And she goes, well, you know, my family got me in drug rehab, and I'm clean now and I'm safe. And she said, I just wanted to come down here and tell you thank you for saving my life. And again, you guys, when something like that happens and you hear a story like that, the whole world stops. because everything that you're doing, everything that you sacrifice, everything that you've lived for, it all changes at that moment, and it makes all the sacrifices worth it. You know, and I told her, I said, you know, it was an honor that God put you in my life and allowed me to be there to help you that night. I said, and even more of an honor was that I got to pay your grandfather back for what he gave to me so many years ago. And I hadn't told her that I was a Christian because of her grandfather and because of the pastor that he led to the Lord, that led me to the Lord that day. So, you know, one of the things that I'm encouraged by as the ministry goes on is we never know what seeds we're planting. We never know, you know, that people refer to seed planting and harvesting and all these different things in the ministry. And the reality is we don't know what we're really doing. So some days you do something and you just see something really special happen. And you can do the same exact thing a week later and nothing happens. You feel like, man, that was a waste of my time. Nobody showed up. Nothing happened. This sucks. In those situations, you have to realize there's times of harvest, which are when you get to have all your fruits from laboring. You know, you plant your soil, you till your soil, you put seeds in there, you fertilize, you water it, and 6 months later you have a crop. If you do things right, you get to harvest that crop. If you don't, I mean, sometimes the crops, you just don't know, things don't go right. And sometimes when you're out there doing ministry, for the ones of you that might be watching this that are trying to figure out what God's doing with you, I would just say, get up and go. You know, get up and go and trust that God's going to use you to do what he needs you to do. And some days you're going to see a harvest. Some days you're going to be sitting on the beach all by yourself with nobody to talk to, wondering why God has you there. That happened to me a lot. But the very next day, or even that day, I'd be sitting there going, man, there's nobody here, God. It's raining. I'm going to go home. And I end up going to a Jack in the Box in Huntington and end up leading a homeless kid and helping a homeless kid out and watching him change his life. And if I wasn't there, I couldn't have been the guy that did that. And would have somebody else, maybe God would have sent somebody else for that kid. But it was my job at the time. So I want to encourage you guys, is you're watching these videos, don't just listen to my story, but listen to what God was doing through the ministry and how unorchestrated it is and how unrehearsed and just the things that we did. We literally would just go down to the beach and we would just sit there and I would pray to myself, pray to God, but under my breath, you know, not looking like some crazy Bible thumper guy. And what God would do is somebody would walk by and I'd just be like, hey man, how you doing today? What can I do? You need any prayer for anything? People be like, no, I don't believe in God. I'm like, you don't need to. You know, and I tell them, you don't need to believe in God. I believe in God. And if he brought you by, I got to at least ask if you need prayer for anything. And a lot of people will let you pray for them, even though they don't believe. And that's what ended up happening. It became a ministry where it was a friendship ministry, man. And so helping this young girl helped me to realize that no matter what I was doing in my ministry, no matter what happened in my life, I was never going to put work or my ministry before my kids, because I didn't want my kids, while I was out saving the world, I didn't want my kids to end up being under the pier, shooting up heroin. So hope that encourages you guys. Hope that gives you guys a little bit of insight in just knowing what God's doing in different people's lives. You know, we can't predict, we can't see. We just have to go through the motions. And when you go through the motions, God's going to blow your mind. You know, you're going to get mind blown by the things that happen, but you got to be ready for it. You got to be open for it. And, you know, if you guys are out there, you're hooked on drugs, you're looking for a way out, you know, find somebody that can help you. You know, there's people out there that are amazing. I'm not a therapist by any means, but I've got experience, and basically I try to make myself available to the people God puts in my life. to just be there for them. I don't care if they're Christian, not Christian, atheist, Muslim, whatever. It doesn't matter to me. That's not the point. But the point would be just we need to be able to help each other. There's a lot of hurt in the world today, and being available and making ourselves available on a daily basis to just helping other people is very rewarding. So hope this helps you guys. Subscribe, like, pass it on to your friends. Try to get people watching these. I hope it helps somebody. If you know somebody that needs to hear it, please send them to the video and have them watch it. And we'll see you on the next one.